Well, it's a new year, so maybe that means you've got better money habits, right? Or at least you're hopefully working towards better money habits. Also, so on the program, we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to improve your financial habits here in the new year, 2024. And then we're also going to talk about some of the trends that are emerging that have some interesting investment and economic implications for not just you, but also your money. So welcome on into Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest running radio programs. Also happen to be one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts, so make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast channel. Be sure to take a moment and find us on those channels. If you have trouble finding us, go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning. And while there, you can click on the icons and get immediately connected. Also, big news for us here at Nelson Financial Planning. Recently featured by the Orlando Business Journal in their book of lists, recognizing our 40th anniversary in business here in the year 2024. So an exciting, nice little two-page spread, actually, in the Orlando Business Journal's Book of Lists. So if you haven't seen it, we encourage you to check it out. Also, this means that this is our first official show of 2024. If you missed last week, well, that was sort of our last show of 2023. We did our Fearless Forecast, as we like to do each and every year. If you missed it, we suggested that the Dow would hit 41,500 by year-end 2024. I guess that means that you'll have to listen to the show a year from now to see how well we did on that. In 2023, while we may have been a little bit too optimistic and thinking that the Dow might get to 40,000. It wound up coming in just under about 38,000 for the year. Markets were certainly quite strong, definitely stronger than, I guess, what most predictions for 2023 would have, given that it seemed about a year ago where everybody and their brother was saying that 2023 was going to be a recession. We were sort of one of those folks that was the outlier, thinking that the year might actually be pretty decent. So we'll see how our prediction for 2024 comes to bear. Certainly a new year, some of those same old predictions of calamity. It seems like every time we go into a year, there's plenty of people out there that are saying, oh, it's just going to be a disaster. But I guess it always comes back to, for us, to work with what we know, right? Rather than get distracted on the predictions and the headlines. And frankly, oftentimes I think people like to predict calamity because it generates a bigger audience than if you're saying, yeah, you know what, everything's going to be fine. Check back with me in a year. That doesn't really generate nearly as much excitement as the world's going to end. So make sure you stay tuned, right? You know the drill. That's how media works. But I thought we would start the program with a conversation about the sort of the two things that we know, right? And the first that we know, certainly this past week, the Federal Reserve minutes were released and seemed to underlie this following statement, that the Federal Reserve is no longer raising rates. That's what we know because that's what they've said. So it seems to me that we can take that at face value. And then number two, and this is an age-old one, diversification and consistency always pay off over time. That's another one that's pretty much been true for the 100+ year history of the market. So we thought we would take a little bit of a time in this first segment of the show, our first of 2024, to sort of talk about the investment implications of those two concepts, because that's really kind of what we know, right? Everything else is sort of speculative in terms of what may or may not happen in terms of employment, in terms of the economy, all of those kinds of things, certainly in terms of a presidential election, right? Let's not forget 2024 is a presidential election year. That's going to be a lot of fun. But those concepts certainly have some widespread implications for your money in this year. So let's start with the first one that we know. The Federal Reserve no longer raising rates, came out again this past week. Basically, the minutes were released confirming that. History tells us that when they are no longer raising rates, cash rates, the rates that you're getting on your money markets, your savings accounts, your CDs, all of that kind of stuff, are going to come down. And if that's the case, then most likely as an investor, you're going to have some missed opportunities. This concept is a concept that we discussed in our January mailing that we sent out to our clients here at the beginning of the year. Should hit most of our client mailbox here at the beginning of the week. And the concept there is that you had a lot of dollars flow into cash, money markets, savings accounts, and things like that. Massive flow, like $7 trillion. And that type of behavior, let's face it, reflects a little bit, or a lot of bit, of the herd mentality, right? You're going with the herd because everybody is doing it. Well, it's one of the many psychological concepts that ultimately underline investor performance over time. Those concepts we certainly discuss at length in our new book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents. Spend a whole chapter on these psychological concepts that ultimately undermine people's investment results over time. One of which, of course, is the herd mentality. If everybody's doing it, everybody keeps doing it, then the reality is that for the most part, there's going to be a lot of people that are either late to it or stay longer in it than they should. Because the reality is that when interest rates stop getting raised, then the next part of the cycle is that they're going to start to drop. When they start to drop, all of these great rates that you're getting on your savings, well, maybe not on your savings account because banks have been kind of stingy on that stuff, but things like money markets and maybe CDs, those rates are going to come back down. So given that it's these types of concepts that we talk about in the book, and we certainly want 2024 to get off to a great start, we are extending our free offer for you to get a free hard copy of our new book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, all the way until January 31st. After that, you're going to have to go through Amazon. They're charging like $14.99 when in fact they get it back into inventory. And so you might want to take us up on that free book offer, particularly because it is exclusively designed to give you some strategies and tools to help you achieve financial success. Of course, that's why we put the chapter about the psychological implications and the psychological things that can happen to you as an investor that can undermine your investment results, because it's important to understand what it is that you're doing, particularly because for the most part, it's these snap decisions, these psychologically based decisions that can cause you to ultimately undermine your long-term results. So the herd's always late. You think of where the herd went last year, they went into cash. So that's a pretty significant amount of dollars that went in. And what we see is that those savings rates start to drop on a historical basis before the Fed rates. What also happens is that the markets improve in the easing part of that cycle at a much faster pace as well. We're going to have more on these concepts when we return here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Stay tuned with us through the break as we continue these conversations on the kinds of things that you want to be aware of in order to achieve financial success in 2024. Talking about the two things that we know as we think about 2024 to sort of contrast with all those different types of prognostications out there about what the year may or may not hold. Here's what we know. Federal Reserve no longer raising rates. Before the break, we were talking about the implications of that and ultimately how that could very well be a missed opportunity for investors who have followed the herd and flowed a bunch of money into cash and money markets and savings and CDs. Meanwhile, the rates on those are expected to drop during the course of the year. They typically drop before the Federal Reserve starts to cut rates. And the inertia that's going to sit in is no different than the inertia that we saw a year or so ago, where a lot of people were just kind of leaving money sitting in their banks, even though the banks weren't paying any interest. And it took some time before people realized, hey, wait a second. If I go into a money market, I'm going to get a much better yield on my cash. That took a long time before people really realized that and made adjustments in terms of their cash positions. We think the same thing is going to play out, except the other way, in that inertia is sitting in, thinking that you've still got a great rate on your money markets and CDs and things like that. And then when those things mature or the rate changes on the money markets, those rates typically drop much faster than anticipated. And what's interesting is the markets typically improve with lower rates. So that's sort of issue number one, or concern number one for investors here in 2024, is that inertia is going to sit in, and it's going to be kind of the flip of what we saw a year ago in terms of those rates now going down and people stuck saying, oh, I'm not making nearly as much money. And then what typically happens is, particularly when the Fed starts to ease rates, is that the market as a whole winds up going up. So clearly a missed opportunity, or the potential for a real missed opportunity for investors out there based upon kind of the current landscape. Number two, and that's sort of back to some things that we know, and that is that diversification matters for long-term investment results. And folks, here's the issue. It's an issue that I don't think we're hearing enough about, but you need to be aware of, and of course, that's why we do this program each and every week. So let me take a moment and welcome you on in here to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, also a top 25 financial planning podcast. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great folks who also happen to be certified financial fiduciaries as well, who stand ready this week to help you improve your life. Wouldn't that be a great thing to start a new year off on the right foot by improving your life through a successful and cost-effective financial strategy? Give us a call this week, 407-629-6477, and schedule your absolutely free conversation. Or better yet, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of those strategies that you can use to improve and achieve financial success, make sure you reach out to us through our website, nelsonfinancialplanning.com, and request a free hard copy of our new book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents. So here's issue number two, sort of back to the second thing that we know, and that is that diversification matters for long-term investment results. But here's the sort of the hidden risk, and I think this is a risk that is probably the highest that we've seen in over 2 decades. And what we're talking about is that if your portfolio is set up with a bunch of index funds or ETF funds, you probably aren't as diversified as you may think. Both of those types of investments, index funds, ETFs, generally are static baskets that typically will track the overall markets. The problem is that the overall markets are much more concentrated than they have been in over 2 years. What do we mean by that? Well, there's a small handful amount of stocks that are ultimately driving the market performance. It's not unlike kind of what we saw in the late 90s with Y2K, if you remember that far back. Very small handful of companies that were going to be the solution to Y2K. And ultimately, their stock prices got bid up, and then there was a very small amount of companies that were ultimately driving the vast majority of the performance in the indexes during that period of time. Fast forward to today, and it's not Y2K, it's AI and all of the hype that's happening with that. And so if you look at those 7 holdings, and we talked a little bit about this on the program last week, but the average PE of those 7 companies that are driving over a third of the index is over 50. Now, we're not going to get into kind of what the PE and all of that means because we spent a lot of time on that last week on the program. If you want to know more of what that means, we would encourage you to go to our archives, go to our channels on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform and check out last week's show where we talk a lot about what the PE means. But for summary purposes, the higher the PE, the more risk you are taking with your money as you invest it. At 50, that's about 3 times kind of the normal PE ratio that you would want to be at. So you get the idea. So what happens is when things change, they have a tendency to change very quickly. So I think a lot of folks are going to be surprised about the diversification that they actually don't have when it comes to performance, particularly based upon the concentration of what's going on in the overall indexes with just that small handful of companies. So bottom line, investors need to be aware, and we think that those are going to be 2 sort of important traps that investors could very well fall in. Missed opportunities by continuing to sit in cash as rates drop. The inertia sits in. You think you're still making a good rate, and all of a sudden you look up and the money market that was at 5% is now at 2.5%. That's going to happen very, very quickly, particularly as the Federal Reserve begins its pivot from raising rates to ultimately easing rates. Remember, the Federal Reserve has said they plan on lowering rates by a full percentage point during the back half of the year. And then the second issue, the lack of diversification, particularly once the AI bubble kind of, I want to say pops, but yeah, good word. Once the AI bubble kind of gets calmed down a little bit, that lack of diversification is going to jump out pretty dramatically. So as always, we do the show every week to keep you informed of the latest developments. So I'm sure we'll be talking about those concepts in terms of some of the important concepts to know for 2024 and those traps to avoid as investors. Next topic that we wanted to kind of cover was some of the trends out there that are happening and sort of what the investment implications are to them. So every year, the folks at Gallup, who's a very popular polling company, put out a report detailing sort of the various trends that appeared to be occurring during the course of the prior year. They usually have like a dozen of them. We're not going to get into all of them, but there was a few of them that I thought would be particularly important to sort of discuss on the program because they do have some investment implications and the like that we wanted to kind of share with you in terms of their impact on the global economy. So the first is the perception now, or the much higher perception now, as China being the greatest enemy of the U.S. Obviously, growing tensions throughout the course of last year caused Americans to perceive China as the #1 enemy to the U.S. Not long ago, it was Russia, North Korea, those types of things. But now China seems to be first on the list. And if you think about that, there's certainly some investment implications behind that, right? I mean, a lot of stuff that we get through our online providers is in fact made in China. Shoot, a lot of stuff that we get at the stores here in the U.S. is made in China. So if that tension is rising, you could potentially have less availability for those cheaper goods. And if you have less availability for cheaper goods, what does that mean? Well, that means that you're going to have a little bit higher inflation than what you probably saw over the course of the past 10 years. So there's some interesting investment implications and economic implications to some of these trends that we're going to continue to share with you after the break here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. On the program, we're talking about some of the trends that the folks at Gallup discovered during the course of 2023, and there's certainly a bunch of them that they note in the report that they issue out every year. And we're focusing on just a handful of them that have to have major economic and investment implications. And so we're going to continue on this part of the conversation here on Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, also a top 25 financial planning podcast. So make sure you check us out on your favorite podcast platform. Any trouble finding us, or if you'd like to request a free copy of our new book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, just go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning. There you'll see a bunch of icons or a request form to have us mail the book to you at absolutely free of cost. Click on any of those links and you'll get immediately set up to our channels. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great folks who stand ready to help you in the new year get on a better financial track. So one of the next items sort of in these trends that the folks at Gallup noticed during the course of 2023, and this one probably doesn't surprise you, but it is alarming how much the trust in media has evaporated. And certainly that's a longer term trend of our time, sort of that collapse in public confidence in the news. Last year, a record 39% of Americans said they have no trust at all in the media. And I mean, I guess the disturbing part of that is that, you know, I think in today's world with technology and our feeds and those kinds of things, that if you don't have the trust in mainstream media, and the purpose of mainstream media was to sort of present that balanced perspective, and obviously that has gotten skewed mightily over the course of the past few decades, the reality is that if you're relying on your feed, on your phone, for your information, for your news stories and the like, then I think you got to be really careful, because emotions and that can come from kind of feeding into the same porridge, if you will, that's getting delivered to you on your feed on your phone, leads to maybe a more heightened emotional response. It certainly leads to lack of perspective, which is crucial to have in order to achieve investment results over time. So this trend in not trusting media, we think has some investment implications, because it's going to prevent people or cause people to have less perspective than what they might otherwise have had. When you have less perspective, guess what? You have a tendency to kind of make more rash decisions than if you were kind of presented both sides of the equation. So certainly some interesting investment and financial implications that are as a result of that sort of trend, if you will, which has certainly been a longer term trend. The next trend, and this is a trend that we discussed earlier, is the affection for cash, right? The affection for cash when interest rates are high. You know, let's face it, folks, 5% money market rates I haven't seen since like 25 years. So there was like a massive gulf of like 2 decades where they were at zero, or basically zero. So you have to be careful about what you get caught up with, thinking that it's going to continue, because in the case of interest rates, it typically does not, particularly when you go through these periods of where interest rates are high and then they're lowered again. So we talked about that earlier in the program, but obviously that's one of the big trends from last year. Another trend, and I guess this is particularly important here at the beginning of the year, popular New Year's resolution, right? Everybody wants to lose weight or get in shape. And the reality is we don't do a particularly good job as Americans. During the course of the past 4 years, there has been a 6% increase in the percentage of U.S. adults falling into the obese category. Healthy eating habits over that same period have eroded, with the sharpest decline being folks in the younger generation, 30 to 44. So that's got some investment implications, right? Because you hear all of these weight loss drugs that ultimately are generating a tremendous amount of profit for big pharma and pharmaceutical companies. So certainly some interesting investment implications on that trend as we think about the demand or the strain on the healthcare system that comes with that, and what the investment implications are for that. Maybe it's not, maybe your portfolio shouldn't be overly technology based. Maybe you should also have a nice component that is more in the healthcare sector as well. So certainly some things to be thinking about as we go through these trends. The last one sort of goes hand in hand with the headlines out of Harvard, where the president of Harvard was forced to resign. There's been a consistent decline and America's confidence in higher education institutions. The rate of those expressing a great deal of confidence in colleges and universities declined for a third time. The investment implications on that have to deal with educating the next generation. And as they look at the reevaluation of sort of the cost versus the benefit, as they look at student loans and do I really want to accrue an excessive amount of student loans, those are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about in terms of what the education level or the decisions that folks are going to make. Another thing that strikes me, and maybe you've seen the ad, it's actually a Home Depot ad that talks about the number of athletes or the number of college kids that go pro, and then compares that to the number of trade professionals that are needed in society as a whole. I want to say the ad mentions like 400,000 or something like that. But those are the kinds of things that are going to have some longer term impact, particularly when we think of where these trend lines are going to be. So some interesting stuff, certainly stuff that we will continue to talk about in the weeks, months, and years ahead here on Dollars and Cents. Of course, the beginning of the year, speaking of New Year's resolutions, means that you may have a New Year's resolution to get in better financial shape. We would say that there's one thing that you can do that would help, and that, of course, is reaching out to us through our website, Nelson Financial Planning, and not just scheduling a free conversation, but also requesting an absolutely free copy of our latest book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents. It is packed with ideas and strategies on how to achieve financial success. We've extended the free offer until the end of this month, January 31st, in order to help people get on the right track here in the new year. And then number two, tracking your money. We have a couple of downloadable budgets and net worth statements through the book that really are good tools for you to use to get on track, on top of your income and expenses. Because let's face it, if you're going to improve your financial aspects here in the new year, then you got to start with kind of that budget concept and tracking your money and money in and money out and those kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, there's so many psychological phenomena that sort of work against us to achieve financial success. We're talking about that herd mentality earlier in the show. I also got a full chapter, one of the early chapters in the book, that kind of sets the stage for that psychological impact that can impact how we treat our money and how we value it. As you might well imagine, the top 3 financial New Year's resolutions: save more, Pay down debt, spend less. What's the key to achieving any of those? It involves keeping track of your income and your expenses. So beyond that, we wanted to spend some time on the program giving you sort of a few specific tips besides creating a budget and tracking expenses to sort of help you achieve that financial success in 2024. So when we return from the break, we're going to get into sort of 3 tips that we've got beyond just establishing a budget and tracking your expenses. All of that coming up next here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. So, talking about some of the things that you can do here in the new year to help you get on track financially, right? We talked about before the break kind of the fundamentals, establishing a budget, tracking your income, tracking your expenses, and certainly requesting a copy of our new book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, from our website, Nelson Financial Planning. Got a lot of tools in there that can help you achieve financial success at any time, whether it's the beginning of the year or any time during the course of the year. But we thought it would be good to kind of delve into 3 separate tips, if you will, on how you might be able to achieve some of those financial goals of trying to get on top of your finances, right? We were saying before the break, the 3 most popular New Year's resolutions involving your finances typically involve saving more, paying down debt, and spending less. And all that sounds great and easy to say, hey, I'm going to pay down my debt, or I'm going to spend less, or save more. The reality is that it's not an easy thing to do, right? If you've ever tried to do it, it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of effort to do that. So beyond that, we wanted to share sort of 3 ideas that came to us in terms of how you might be able to do that a little bit more effectively. And some of that deals with just simplifying things, right? Rather than have 3 credit cards, have 1. Rather than have bills that you've got to write checks out and things like that, maybe you have those set up on a recurring basis so that you know they're getting paid and getting paid on time. So maybe simplifying life. I think far too often, I look at my kids' wallets and there's they're like 2 inches thick, for crying out loud. And some of that's gift cards and things like that. But that's still a lot of stuff that I think causes you to not be as financially astute as you could be. So maybe get into the habit of trying to simplify things, right? Sometimes simplifying things is a great way to get a better understanding of what exactly is going on, particularly when it comes to your finances. And then make sure that you're taking the time. This is not an exercise that you can just do while you're on a commercial break, while you're watching your favorite program, right? Well, they don't really have commercial breaks on streaming services, but you get the idea, right? You got to take the time to get organized. A couple weeks ago, we suggested sort of that week between Christmas and New Year's, usually a quieter week, as a good week to sort of get organized and prepare yourself for the new year. Hopefully you took advantage of that suggestion and did that. But be intentional about setting aside some time in order to get your finances in good shape. Because if you don't spend the time on it to get organized or to start to implement, then it's never really going to happen, right? So maybe this coming week or this weekend, next weekend, you wind up setting aside a day to maybe cancel a subscription that you no longer use, or maybe you go through and look at the subscriptions that you have and make sure that you're using all of the ones that you're paying for, or closing an old account that has fees, those kinds of things. Make a list of sort of that to-do list and try and cross off one item every day. And then the last concept, and we talk a little bit about this in the book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, but make spending hurt. And I guess that's not maybe the best way to say it, but make spending have a more psychological impact than just tapping your phone or tapping a credit card. I think it's just way too easy to spend money in the most sort of less efficient way as possible, because all of that is easy to tap or to just click. And the reality is that it doesn't cause us to slow down and think about, okay, how much money am I spending here? And is this really a good decision? The age-old advice on that is to use cash. But let's face it, in the world today, not many people use cash. But what are some of the things that you can do in the current world as we know it, where cash isn't used as much? By the way, if you can go back to that using cash, studies show that that actually has a much more psychological impact to the physicality, the tangibility of cash. Using it causes you to slow down and make better financial decisions. But even with credit cards and the technology that we have today, there are some tactics that you could do to help get on top of your financial success. One of which, and I know I've certainly done this many times with various online providers, is if you clear your saved credit card information. Stop and think about how they have set that up to make that as easy as it can be, right? I mean, you literally just got to click, 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 and you're done. You don't even have to go get your wallet. You don't have to go get the credit card. You don't have to put it in. By using that saved credit card information, it makes these purchases so much easier to happen. So one piece of advice that experts give is that eliminate the saved credit card information, which certainly buys time for you to think about the purchase that you're going to make. The other thing, of course, is to just try and introduce the physicality or some physicality in those decisions to spend money, is make sure you're asking for a receipt. I think far too often the little screen pops up, right? And it's just easy to say no receipt because we're looking to get out of the store as quickly as possible. The reality is that you may want to be intentional and take that receipt. Again, that physical piece of paper is a good way for you to be keeping track of exactly what it is that you are spending. So just some thoughts in terms of how you might be able to achieve that financial success. One other thing that we're going to add in here into the conversation is thinking about another New Year's resolution that we all wind up or probably have done at some point in our lives. And that is this notion of, okay, it's a new year. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to do all of those things. Look, food is like the third biggest item on most people's budget after housing and automobile expenses. So food's a pretty big piece of that overall financial perspective. And when we think about food and it being as big of an expense for us, and we stop and think about inflation and sort of where inflation is still very much having an impact, and that would certainly be at the grocery store, one of the easiest ways to sort of cut or improve on your overall finances is to keep track of kind of the food that you're buying. According to Wall Street Journal, about 20% of food purchased last year ended up in the garbage. That's 20%. Americans threw out $252 billion worth of food last year. That works out to nearly $1,900 per household, or about $150 per month. That's just a shocking amount of food that is getting thrown out. Literally, you're taking dollars and throwing them in the trash. That should be a shock. $252 billion. Imagine the impact that could have on Americans' retirement if instead of throwing $252 billion in the trash from food waste, that ultimately they wind up saving for retirement. Look, we've all done it. We all want to eat healthy. So far too often we get the bag of spinach and then it sits and rots and then we throw it away. Grocery shop, I guess, for the version of you that exists, not the version of you that you'd like to be. Some of those tips at the grocery store to help you with that food budget would obviously be to plan accordingly, right? No different than budgeting itself. You make a plan, you stick with it. Go to the grocery store less. Take inventory of what you have before you go to the grocery store, right? You don't need 3 bottles of ketchup. And try and stick with that list. That physical piece of paper really helps. So just another thing that we wanted to share with you here in the new year as a way that you can maybe look at what you're doing and ultimately improve your overall financial picture. With that, we're going to wrap it on up and get on out of here. Thank you all for listening to the program. If you've got any questions about anything that we talked about or want to reach out to us about a topic that you'd like to hear on the program, just contact us through our website, Nelson Financial Planning. While there, you can also request our free book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Have a great rest of your day.